we could go in and add our beam. So where we can go to do that is our members page. And inside of our steel section, we can come up to this icon here. That is our member add column. But if we hit this drawer button or this drop down, we can see that we have add beam, vertical brace, horizontal brace, and a joist. So I can come up here and click on my member add beam. And I've actually pinned this to my toolbar as well, since we'll be using this one quite a bit. So I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to click on my member add beam. And once we do that, we are going to get the same member add options bar that we saw when we were inputting in our columns. And that'll look familiar. We can change our section size here, what our left and right end settings are for our beam. And then we also have our locate tab that populates with our snaps, our modifiers, and our XYZ offsets. Now, one thing I will go over when inputting in our beams, we want to make sure that we have our correct snaps on. You want to make sure that you have your intersection of construction line snap on. And the reason you want to have this one on is because you want to make sure you're picking the correct elevations. So right now, if I look at my XYZ offsets, this is our Z offset right here. And if I hover over any of these points, I'm picking the points in that elevation, so that 4,624 elevation. So let's say, for example, if I was using my exact point snap, what the exact point snap does is it wants to pick the closest end of that member, whichever's closer, so the bottom end or the top end of that member that is right there. So right here, we're picking the top end of that column, C1 column, and we can tell that because we can look at our Z offset, and it's going to our roof elevation. So if I would pick that, it would input that beam at that 8,129 millimeter elevation, and we don't want that. So we just want to make sure we have our intersection of construction line snap checked on, and we can see in our Z offset, it's back at that 4,624 elevation. So one thing I can do here is I can come up here, and I'm going to be looking at the beam from grid line A to B. So that'll be a UB 457 by 152 by 60. And if we wanted to type that in here, we can. I like picking the section size, so I'm going to browse for that section size. And we can find here a UB 457 by 152 by 60. You could either search that in the search bar here as well. So I'm going to select that and say OK. For our left end settings, we will leave this set to auto standard, but we could choose if we wanted a user defined connection, if we want a plain end connection, a bearing, clip angle, end plate, shear, seated, splice plate, or a fully welded moment. I'm just going to leave that on auto standard. I'm going to leave the right on auto standard, and I'm just going to go ahead and pick my points. So I'm going to pick this point here at A in 1 and B in 1. And we can see that that beam gets input into our model there. So now if we look at our button bindings down in the lower left corner, we can see that the middle click is repeat. And we can see that the beam from B to C is the exact same. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to middle click here. And we can see that that beam gets repeated and it goes from B to C. Now we have a couple beams on the other side that are the same. So I'm going to either zoom out and go to that location, or if we notice, if we hit shift, we can see that our button bindings, when I hit shift, it changes from repeat to pan. So if I hit shift, I can then middle click to pan. And if I middle click, I can go down to the spot in my model where I want to be. So I can pan with while still being in the add beam command. And now that I'm down to the grid line number 3, we can see that the beam at A and B to C is the same. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to repeat here, and I'm going to repeat here as well. Now what we can do is we could come up here and we could change our section size again. So I'm going to look at the grid line A that's running vertical. So from grid line 1 to 2, we have a UB 533 by 210 by 82. So I'm going to browse for that. It's a 533 by 210 by 82. I'm going to select that. And what I'm going to do for this beam is I'm just going to pick my points. So I'm going to pick my left end here and my second point here. And then from our grid line 2 to 3, our section size changed again, so we'll have to come up here and specify. We want a UB 457 by 191 by 98. So let's say I want to search this time. I'm going to go UB 457 by 191 by 98, so that's the one we need right there. I'm going to double click on that, and then I'm going to pick my points again for this one. So I'm going to left click here, and I'm going to left click here. And then let's look at getting our beams in on grid line 2 from A to B and B to C. We can see that those section sizes are the same. So that would be a UB 457 by 152 by 52. So I'm going to come up here and specify that. So it'd be a 152 by 52 right here. And I'm going to say OK. Now one thing we could do here is we notice we have a button at the end of our member add options bar. This is a continuous add mode. Right now it is clicked off. So if I hit this, it's going to turn green, and so that means it's on. And one thing I could do here is I could left click at my grid line A and 2, since that's where my first one's going to be, and this one's going from grid line A to B. So I can click this here. And now what it wants me to do is it's already used that second point to start the second beam. So now what it wants me to do is it wants me to continuously add that beam in. So I can come over here and I can just click at my grid line C and 2, and it's going to put that beam in like that. So if you had a whole bunch of beams in a straight line that you wanted to continuously add across, that's what that tool is for. I'm just going to keep that off. And I'm going to return out of that. So now if we look at our grid line B, we can see that we have a 457 by 152 by 52 going from grid line 3 to 2 and from 2 to 1. So I'm going to go enter into my member add beam command again. And it does remember that section size since that's the last one we put in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to locate that beam here at grid line B, and I'm going to go to 2. And since we added in going up, since we have one in this direction going up right now, I could come down here and I could hit my repeat button. And since it's going in that same direction, if I hit repeat here, we can see that it gets added. Now that we know we're at the correct elevation for our second floor framing plan, we can go ahead and start entering our beams into our model. So to start, I'm going to focus on the upper left corner in sheet S1. So looking at grid lines A1 to B1, we can see that we have a UB 457 by 152 by 60. So I'm going to kind of zoom into that location here. And then we can navigate to our member add beam. So that's going to be located in the same spot where our columns were, so that'll be in our members page. And right here, we can see that this is our member add column. If we drop this down, we can go to our member add beam. Once we click on that, we get our member add options bar, so similar to the one we saw when we were adding in our columns, as well as our locate tab with our different snaps, modifiers, and our XYZ offsets. So the first thing we can look at doing is changing our section size to whatever we need that to be. I can browse for the section size. Right now it is on the one that I need, so it'll be a UB 457 by 152 by 60, so I can double click on that. And once that is set, we have some different options for our left and our right end settings. Right now these are set to auto standard, but if we wanted to, we could change that to have a user defined connection, a plain end, bearing, clip angle, end plate, shear, seated, splice plate, or a fully welded moment. In this case, I'm going to keep it set to auto standard for the left and the right end. And the next thing we can do is pick our points. Now, when we're picking our points to enter beams in, we want to make sure our snaps remain on the intersection of construction line. The reason we want to have it on intersection of construction line is because we want our elevation to stay the same. For example, I'm going to turn on my exact point snap, and now if I look at my Z offset number up here, it has changed from 4,624 to 8,129. So what the exact point is doing is it wants to pick the bottom or the top of this column member that is here, whichever one is closer. So in this case, the top point is closer to where we're at. So it wants to pick the 8,129 millimeter mark. If we would enter in our beams at this elevation, they would be wrong. We want our second floor framing plan beams to be input at 4,624 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and just make sure my intersection of construction line is snap is on, and I can locate my left point at grid line A. And again, make sure your snaps don't change when you locate your first point. And we can come over here and locate our second point at grid line B1. And we have our first beam input into our model now. If we look at our sheet S1, we can see that between grid lines B and C, and then on grid line 3 from A3 to B3, and then from B3 to C3, we have the same beams. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to repeat this command. And if we look at our button bindings in the lower left corner, we can see our middle click is repeat. So I can middle click here on grid line B, and we can see that same column gets input to the right of that. And now we need to go to our grid line number 3. So we could do this in a couple ways. If we wanted to zoom out and zoom back into that location, we could do that. Or if we want to pan down to the bottom, what we can do, since we're in the member add beam tool right now, our button bindings wants to repeat. If I hit shift on my keyboard, we can see that middle click turns from repeat to pan. So if I can hold shift on my keyboard, I can middle click and I can kind of drag my screen up here, and then I can pan down to the location that I need to be. So this is where we need to put in these other two beams at. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to repeat the command again at A3 and again at B3. And now we have all 4 of those beams input into our model. So what I'm going to continue to do now is I'm going to go through all the beams that are horizontal on our S1 sheet. So I'm going to be looking at grid line number 2 from A2 to B2, and then from B2 to C2. So we can see that those section sizes are different. They are 457 by 152 by 52. So what we can do here is we can come up to our section size here, and we can specify what we need. So it'll be this one right here. We can say OK. And now I'm going to locate on grid line number 2 from A to B. And again, I just want to be sure that my Z elevation is correct. So once that one is good, I'm going to go ahead and repeat this command here. And we have that beam in right there. And then if we look at our sheet S1, we can see grid line C1 to D1 has the same section size for those beams. So we can come up here, and if we wanted to, we could either locate our left point here or left point here. Since it's going in that direction, we can actually middle click and it'll repeat that beam from grid line C to D. And then if we look from C3 to D3 on the bottom portion of our model here, it is the same beam as well. So I can come down here and I can middle click in this location as well. And now we have all of those beams input into our model. Now if we look here at grid lines 1.9 and 2.1, we do have a different section size beam. So I'll be looking, and this is from C to D. So these two lines right here is where we need to go to next. So if we look at our sheet S1, that'll be a UB 406 by 140 by 39. So I can come up here and I can change that section size. So it'd be 406 by 140 by 39. And then I'm going to locate, so on grid line 1.9 in C, and then I'm going to go to D. And then I'm going to repeat this beam right here. But before I do that, I'm going to turn on this last option so I can show you what this does. This is a launch member edit icon. So right now it's off. If I turn this on, so now that I have that option turned on, I'm going to locate my first point here and my second point here. And once I locate my second point, we can see that the beam edit window will open up. And this looks similar to your column edit window. It is a little bit different because we do have some different options for beams. So in the general settings, you can change your section size, your steel grade, your sequence, depending on what type of material it is. You could change your toe direction, what your long leg is, if you want double material, if you want a center material, do you want welded section is single material. You can have a composite designed beam, and if it is composite design, you can specify what the slab width is and what your number of studs is. You can specify your beam rotations, if you want to hold the rotations, if your beam has a rolling operation, if you want to swap the member ends, if you want those beams galvanized, or if you want to break them apart. And then down below that, you have some left end settings and right end settings. So you have your information tab. This will tell you if it's forced or graphical and any information that might apply to that beam. Below that, you can specify what your end elevations are, what your web rotation is, and if you want a standard detail. And then below that, what your connection type is. So on our member add options bar, we chose to be auto standard, but you can change any of that information here if you wanted any different type of connection. And there's some other various settings down below here. We will take a look at that at a later time. Going back up to the top here, I mentioned that you could swap the member ends. So what that means is I'm going to cancel out of this beam edit window and I can show you what this is here. If I hover over this beam right here, we can see that the crosshair or the little circle that populates on the left side is going to show us where the left end of that member is. The left end will always be determined by SDS2, so it wouldn't really matter if you drew that in from left to right or from right to left. SDS2 is just always going to determine where that left end is. So going back to that swap member ends, if you did edit this beam and you did swap member ends and you said OK, now when I hover over that beam, you can see that our left end has changed to where our right end was. So now this end is the left end and the right end is over here. In this case, I don't want that, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to uncheck that and I'm going to say OK. And if you did notice, I did cancel out of that window instead of OKing. So this beam on grid line 2.1 did not get put in. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my add beam again. And we can see our section size is still set. Our launch member edit is still on. I'm going to go ahead and locate that location again. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to say OK. And now we have that beam in our model. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just turn the launch member edit option off so that the next time it doesn't launch that window. So now at this point we should have all of our horizontal running beams for our sheet S1 into our model besides our canopies up front. What I will transition to now is looking at our vertical running beams. So I will start at grid line A between 1 and 2 and 2 to 3, and we'll work our way to the right. So the next couple beams we will focus on getting into our model is going to be on grid line A. Specifically, I'll be talking about A1 to A2 and then A2 to A3. So we'll start at A1 to A2. We can see on our sheet S1 that'll be a UB 533 by 210 by 82. So what we can do is we can run our member add beam icon and we can go ahead and pick our section size. So again, that was a 533 by 210 by 82. Go ahead and select that, say OK. And we're going to go ahead and keep our left and right end settings to auto standard. Make sure we have our intersection of construction lines picked. And we can locate this beam from A2 to A1. Below that from A2 to A3. Our section size changes again. That'll be a UB 457 by 191 by 98. So 457 by 191 by 98. This will be this top one up here. We can say OK. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and pick my 2 points. And we have those 2 beams in there up front. Now we can transition to our grid line B. And we can see here that these 2 are the same section size. So first things first, I'm going to go up and change my section size to be a UB 457 by 152 by 52. So that'll be that one there. And for these 2 beams, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my continuous add mode just so I can show you how this works. So by default it's off. You click that, it turns to green, that means it's on. So what this is going to do is it's just going to continue off my last point that was picked. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to locate down here first at B3. So I'm going to click this spot here and I'm going to go to B2. And once I locate my second point, we can see that the first point for the next beam is already selected off of that last point, and now it wants me to locate a second point. So what I can do here is I can just come up here and I can locate my second point for this beam, and now we have both of those beams in our model already. So if you had a bunch of beams in line, this continuous add mode would be pretty handy to use. In our case, I'm going to go ahead and escape out And I'm going to actually turn that continuous add mode off the next time I get into the beam add, so that it's not continuously asking us to pick points. So now that we have grid line B taken care of, we can move on to grid line C. And we see that these are going to be the same section size as well. So first we need to change what will be a UB 406 by 140 by 46. So that'll be this one right here. Say OK. And again, just locate at C3 to C2, and then from C2 to C1. And then we can transition to our grid line D. So we got 3 beams on our grid line D here, all of which are different section sizes. So I'll start down here at our D3 location. So this will be a 406 by 78 by 67. So that'll be a UB 406 by 178 by 67. I'll say OK. And I'm going to locate at D3. I'm going to go up to D2. Excuse me. I'm going to go. I can go ahead and locate from D to 2.1. And then if we look at sheet S1, from 2.1 to 1.9, we have a different section size beam. And that'll be a NPB 400 by 180 by 57. So what we can do is we can come up here and browse for that size. This one I'm going to search 400 by 180 by 57. So that'll be this one right here. We can say OK. And this one's going from D 2.1 to 1.9. So we go ahead and locate here to here. And then our last vertical running beam in this plan view is going to be from D 1.9 to D1. And that'll be a different section size. It'll be a UB 406 by 140 by 39. So again, one last time we'll come up here and change our section size. Go to UB 406. By 140 by 39. Say OK. And we can locate that last beam. At this point, we should have all but a couple of our beams input into our second floor framing plan. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to turn all of the ones that we have input thus far to solid. If we remember our keyboard shortcuts, that would be SA on your keyboard, or if you want to come up to your display page within your members section, you can come up here and hit this button. I'm just going to hit SA quick, and we can see all of our beams that we have on our second floor framing plan turned to solid. So we have a couple more beams that we need to get input into our model. What I'll be talking about here is the 2 beams between C and D and 1.9 and 2.1, so within this bay right here. To get these beams in, what we'll need to do is we'll need to add a couple of construction lines so we have some good points to pick. So I'm going to zoom into this section here so we can see a little bit better. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my layout page. And in my layout section, I'm going to click on my construction line add. And if we refer to our sheet S1, we can see that in that bay there, we have a couple different dimensions that are being called out. And those are the dimensions I'm going to use to get my construction lines in. So I'm going to start from grid line D and work my way to the left. So we can see that that first dimension we have there is at 914 millimeters, and that'll be to the left side of D. So what I'm going to do to get these construction lines in here is I'm going to use my base construction line snap, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the construction line that is running on top of grid line D. And once I do that, I can enter in a dimension from construction line. So that'll be that 914 millimeters. And for these construction lines, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of them just so we can see the ones that we're adding. So I'm going to change them to a red color. And then since we're going to the left of grid line D, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add minus. So I'll hit add minus, and we can see that construction line is input in where we need it to be. The next dimension away from that 914 is the 2590 dimension, and that is also to the left, so we can keep this window open here. We can just specify our dimension, so it'd be 2590, and we can come down here and we can hit add minus again. The next one we see here is 612. So I'm going to specify 612, add minus, and then we need to have another 2590 dimension to equal out this space. So I'm just going to type in 2590 again and hit add minus. And these are the 4 construction lines we'll need to be able to place these 2 beams at the location that they're in. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this command here. I'm going to exit out of that window and then just right click. And now we're back to our modeling window. What I'm going to do, just to verify the dimensions that we have are correct, I'm going to go up to my tools page, and in my within my measure section here we have a ruler. So I'm going to go ahead and pick on that, and I can see we have a couple overall dimensions here. So from grid line D to this construction line is going to be, or should be, 3,504. So I'm just going to pick those 2 points, and we can see that that distance is correct. If we wanted to do the other side quick, we could go ahead and run that command. So from grid line C to this one, we can see that that's 3,504 right there. So these construction lines are in the correct spots. So now what we can do is we can look at adding in our beams within this bay here. So we can come up here to our member add beam, and if you don't have that pinned, that'll be in your members page under steel. And we can see that these section sizes are UB 406 by 140 by 39. So we're going to specify that. This will be 406 by 140 by 39. And now I can simply just go ahead and pick my points. So I'm going to make sure I'm using the intersection of construction line. So I'm going to pick this point down here and this point up here. And then I'm going to do the same on the opposite side. I'm going to pick this point up here for my first point, and then pick this point down here for my second point. And now we have both of those beams input into our model. I'm going to right click out of this add beam command, and I'm going to hit SA on my keyboard again to turn those 2 to solid. And now we can see we have those 2 beams in there. If we want to rotate around at this point, we can hit our shift key and middle click to rotate, and we can see all of our beams that we have input in so far for our second floor framing plan.